There comes a point in every believer's life where logic runs out and faith has to take over. It's that moment when you've prayed, you've believed, you've done everything you know to do, and yet nothing makes sense. You're standing in a place where your mind is asking questions that your heart cannot answer. And that's not a failure of faith. That's the birthplace of it. Faith does not begin where everything is clear and comfortable. Faith begins where understanding ends and trust is required. We often think that if we truly trusted God, we would understand what He's doing. But the truth is, if you could fully understand God's ways, He wouldn't be God. He'd just be a bigger version of you. And God loves us too much to limit His plans to what our minds can comprehend. He sees the whole picture, while we're stuck looking at one tiny frame. And yet we want Him to explain the entire movie before we're willing to keep watching. There are seasons when God will ask you to walk forward without answers, without reassurance, without visible evidence that things are going to work out. And that's uncomfortable for us, because we like control. We like predictability. We like to know how long it will take and how it will end. But faith says, God, even if you don't explain it, I still believe you are good. That kind of faith stretches you. It humbles you. It forces you to rely on God's character instead of your own reasoning. I've learned that many times God is more interested in developing our trust than giving us explanations. Because explanations don't build spiritual maturity, trust does. Anyone can trust God when everything makes sense, when the bills are paid, the doors are open, and the future looks bright. But it takes real faith to say, God, I don't understand this situation, but I choose to believe that you are still working for my good. When you stop demanding understanding, something powerful happens. You stop fighting God and start walking with Him. You stop analyzing every detail and start leaning on His promises. And that's where peace begins to replace frustration. Not because the situation has changed, but because your heart has decided to trust the one who never changes. There are times when it feels like God has gone quiet, like heaven has pulled the curtains and left you standing in the dark wondering if anyone is listening. You pray, you wait, you look for signs, but all you hear is silence. And silence can be unsettling, because we often assume that if God isn't speaking loudly, He isn't working at all. But some of God's greatest work happens in the unseen, in places where we can't track progress or measure results. Think about how a painter works. When you look at the canvas halfway through the process, it may look messy, confusing, even wrong. Colors overlap that don't seem to belong together. Shapes appear incomplete. If you judge the artwork at that stage, you might think the painter had made a mistake. But the painter sees the finished masterpiece long before anyone else does. In the same way, God is not reacting to your situation. He is responding to a completed vision that you cannot yet see. Just because you don't see movement doesn't mean heaven is inactive. God is arranging things behind the scenes, aligning people, timing and circumstances with precision. What feels like delay to you is often preparation in God's hands. He is strengthening you where you're weak, teaching you patience where you're rushed, and building endurance where you've grown tired. You may be asking God to change the situation, while God is using the situation to change you. There are moments when God intentionally keeps the process hidden, so that when the breakthrough comes, you'll know it could only have been Him. If He showed you every step, you might try to interfere, rush ahead, or rely on your own strength. But when God works in secret, the outcome reveals His power and not your effort. The truth is, God is doing more in your waiting than you realize. One day, you'll look back and understand that what felt like a setback was actually protection. That what looked like a closed door was divine redirection, and that the silence you feared was God carefully orchestrating a result far greater than anything you could have planned on your own. Trusting God is not something you decide once and then never have to think about again. It is a daily, sometimes moment by moment choice, especially when fear tries to take over your thoughts. Every morning you wake up, your mind will give you options. Worry about what might go wrong, replay what already went wrong, or deliberately place your confidence back in God. Trust is choosing God again and again, even when your emotions haven't caught up yet. Fear is loud, demanding, and persistent. It paints pictures in your imagination that feel real enough to steal your peace before anything actually happens. But trust has a quieter voice. It doesn't shout, it rests. It says, God has carried me before, and He will carry me again. The more you choose trust, the weaker fear becomes, because fear cannot survive in a heart that consistently leans on God instead of leaning on uncertainty. There were days when I had to tell myself, I trust God, not because I felt strong, but because I felt weak. And that's okay. Trust doesn't require emotional confidence. It requires obedience. Sometimes trusting God looks like taking the next small step even while your knees are shaking. Sometimes it looks like praising Him before the answer shows up. And sometimes it looks like letting go of control and saying, God, I give you permission to handle this better than I ever could. When you make trust a daily habit, something begins to change on the inside. Peace starts to settle where anxiety once lived. You still notice the challenges, but they no longer dominate your thoughts. You begin to sleep better, breathe easier, and respond instead of react. That's because trust shifts the weight of responsibility off your shoulders and places it where it belongs, into God's capable hands. Choosing trust today prepares you for tomorrow. Every time you trust God in a small situation, you build spiritual strength for bigger challenges ahead. And before you realize it, what once terrified you no longer controls you, because you've learned that no matter what comes, you don't face it alone.